All right, Nic and WebVolta team. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Um, Here's the user interface that I'm talking about. It's called Strategic Pivot. It's all about strategically pivoting into the opportunities of the future. I used to be a process engineer. I managed continuous improvement programs. I encountered very early in my career that the challenge that many businesses face right now is we need a plan for infrastructure between businesses, as in e-commerce, universal product coding. Now, if you have universal product coding, you can digitize receipts, you can automate a lot of the IRS. Um, and I realized that that was all related from my time as a process engineer, but I spent years thinking about how you approach this problem because it's a difficult operational strategy to get businesses positioned to work on infrastructures in an advanced way. It's a kind of a foreign concept. We don't most businesses try to do all of the infrastructure in their house. Like with medical records, you have like Epic Medical Records trying to now warehouse all of the medical record systems for their customers. But the next level of that is we do need to get to a point where all medical records can be stored. And if you think about it, you can split overhead. And I'm already getting a little bit off topic because ultimately I'm talking about a pitch alert network for government efficiency, and that's what this product is meant to illustrate. But there are a lot of analogies with different markets, and so there's a more advanced operational model, and that's what I want to talk about in the middle of this presentation. And lastly, I want to talk about how, just as I can show you some projections for what this user interface is worth, but I truly believe this could be worth billions of dollars. Now, each social media would be competing to implement their own user interface, and they would all be tying together on the back end. Just like I suggest for medical records, they want to do this too. In medical records, it allows you to always have the medical records you need to save a life. And in all honesty, it positions us from some advanced treaty discussion geopolitically, because now we can talk about working with our allies and other nations that we've maybe had tensions with, and we can talk about working on computer systems to protect people who are traveling. If they're in an emergency situation, you want to make sure that they have access to medical records to save a life. That's that's something that we can talk about, a strategy for mutually assured success, not mutually assured destruction. That used to dominate our prior age, and it's not communism. We have to make the systems compatible. Just like in trades, you have standards for stud spacing when you're framing, or levels that you put water lines, or the amount of flow for water lines, or the amount of the gauge for wires for electrical. And you have to have these standards, and you have to make these systems work. Now, we can build a really advanced, you talk about government efficiency, it's going to be about, and I always wanted to make this person a chief visionary officer, because they're the visionary that's trying to help you pivot your economy and get the skills in the workforce to succeed at whatever goal you have, whether it's cryptocurrency policy or whatever else. I personally think we should launch cryptocurrency foundations like the FDIC. I do think that Bitcoin does have a very useful technology, but the way that I understand their immutable ledger, it really only works in an app, and it's just a number pattern, and the immutable ledger isn't a log of transactions. It's just a ledger and a number pattern for how you update the balance, and then that number pattern validates that balance is accurate. Similarly with smart contracts, if a smart contract is updated, it's got an internal log of who is making changes to that document. But I still say there are contexts where if you're sending all of that information in that log around with the contract always, and you're not building a central system that you're just maintaining that data in, and then you're giving access to that, I think that that's the more efficient strategy. It's going to be less data intensive. But again, I'm getting off topic, but this relates to our government of the people. We should want to understand these decisions in complexity. And so here's a user interface, because I knew we were going to have the opportunity to do a lot of really interesting things architecturally, but I wanted to be able to position the team to follow along, see who has better ideas, and sort through that faster. And so if you build this system, I can talk about how you work on this concept, which I call it a linked content system. Now, that's not just linking content. It's actually you're linking learning content to a video or to an article, and you're building interactive quizzes. Now, you can do this in different ways. You can do this through PowerPoint-like slide interfaces. You can do this through a website called Prezi. PowerPoint would need to incorporate certain data table features such that you can create quiz content, and that would be stored in a data table, and then you have your right answers, and that can all function. And so that's a really more advanced way I think the education market will be pivoting into, because you see some of this in training programs for different companies already. Now this has been 5 minutes. I haven't gotten to talk too much. I wanted to have 5 minutes and be able to really dive into this infrastructure or this user interface. The idea is you standardize data tables, and I will give you this product features or project requirements goal, and you standardize the data tables such that we can build a more advanced interactive transcript engine, which opens up how we credential people. And we want to be able to utilize data structures and relationships such that when somebody clicks on a post, like I imagine you click on this post for RSA advances to cybersecurity, enable a cyber force, and then, you know, if you want to understand this, an AI could help somebody populate this part, but you would have digital logic, physical encryption, and RSA technology based upon what you would write about in your approach. Now I'm presenting this as maybe I got Wired magazine to write an article, and they created their own interactive content approach, and I just linked that to my page because we've all been talking about, as a government of the people, going after this goal this year. And so you can see us chasing after different goals, analyzing different strategy, building the market, positioning the market to help us sort through what the best decision is to make. And you can sort comments. If you build this interactive transcript system and it's open, notice how I'm trying to say this color coding, this would be your learning web. This would be how the knowledge relates to RSA technology overall. There would be that version, and then there would maybe be another map that talks about your own, or you could cycle between modeling modes to look at how what you understand relates to what's being presented here. So you'd always be able to understand how what you know relates to what's being presented or what you're trying to look into or understand more deeply. It's going to position us to be able to look through these and analyze these decisions very thoroughly. And then you'll be able to see different learning content. We're going to be positioning the YouTube market. If YouTube helps to make it such that there are companies like Mastery.com, which makes these interactive quizzes. And I think the market will go that direction up until the point where you will see streaming services have these interactive quizzes that you can actually diversify your resume through, and it'll tie into this interactive transcript system. But strategic pivot is not trying to control the interactive transcript engine. That would fall under a different major market vertical. And so the second piece of what I want to really present here and talk about next is all about a more advanced operational model for our government of the people, such that we can talk about how best to utilize our strategies and our architectures between different managerial levels of our society, and we can try to talk about best, most efficient ways to lead our nation. And so part of this overall dynamic protects the free market, because if I go to education and they just don't want to work with me, or they say they don't want to work with me, but then they subtly start doing things that I talked about anyway, and they say, oh, we weren't inspired by you. We should want to protect the innovator, and we should want to protect the free market. And as is what's happening in some industries, if we're not careful, we lock people out of the free market. I argue the big banks, this is part of the reason why cryptocurrency is starting to gain so much traction, but the big banks didn't make it easy for other people to develop apps, or at least I'm not able to confirm that very well. We could get really organized and make it easy for people to develop apps, but we need to kind of have core levels of infrastructure, and we need to open up the free market to experiment with those core levels of infrastructure. It's kind of like open source, but there would be stipulations, like you get to use this infrastructure, but there will be profit sharing to cover this central architecture that's enabling your success, but it'll be small. It'll be like 5-10%, something like that. We also want you to subscribe to our, this is the final thing that I will talk about. I've talked about the Chief Visionary Officer, Strategic Pivot. I've talked about this user interface. And so the Chief Visionary Officer, I should circle back, would be all about positioning the different learning systems, because each social media would be partnering with different learning networks and publishing agencies, and they would all be specializing in different learning models or working with the social medias to perfect different learning models. And then the idea is you click on a post, and it pulls into context depending on what mode you're trying to view it in, because either you want to view how your skills relate to what's being presented, or you're just trying to understand how that fits in overall, which would be a different overview. The viewing modes would be different. And so you would be able to very quickly see the relationships between things. This Chief Visionary Officer wants to make sure that there's some funding going around coming from Strategic Pivot's budget, because this helps to drive the product success of all the user interfaces for the different social medias. If you're working with the government to make it more valuable, then it is more valuable. But yes, you got to position it where it's not a monopolized thing, and it's very much like the roads, where we have different teams working on an overall strategy to enable commerce and enable logistics and the economy to move around. It's just different because now computers, and maybe people who don't understand computer technology, just they won't think of this, but there is this unique business model context where you have to work on, you have the same accounting costs, and if you're clever about how you look at those accounting costs, you can merge overhead, and then with library control, you can have one division that's kind of co-managed between multiple businesses in a vertical, all confirming that's the safest, most secure way to build that layer, or most efficient, or has the most market opportunity. And now you're democratically exploring how to be the best government of the people, up until the point where you can privatize a model of government efficiency and make us way more efficient, way open up access to opportunity, way be in line with all of our ideals with free market capitalism and access to opportunity. This is exactly all the reasons why communism failed. They didn't care about the art of designing the market and the rewards in the market. We should be all about that by positioning ourselves to work with the businesses. And this is my final piece, is because I can come up with this strategy, and you have private sector individuals who can come up with really intricate strategies. You want those people to be able to partner with government and help the government to come up with the best strategies. You actually, the government wants to put the private sector in some sort of partnered position. We don't want this to be undefined. And so the last thing that I wanted to talk about, and I'm into my 11th minute here, is I wanted to talk about driving a more advanced competition around geopolitical strategy. I'm going to go over an overview of some documents that I'm going to link just so that you can see how much work that I've really done on this. I know that we're coming full circle, and I call this America's greatest moment. I can offer your team to be among the founding fathers of America's founding creators. I just call it, we had our founding fathers of America's creation. Now we have the founding partners of realizing America's potential. And so I have some AI generated content here that I put between these symbols. So when you see that, you know that that's coming from Google AI, and I cited that here. And so I talk about some geopolitical background. I found these really cool maps that talk about how the purple is monarchies. We were a limited democracy is what technically this website calls us, but and the only reason why they've made Australia more blue is because, ironically, they were a lot of penal colonies, and so the people who were being in trouble for different crimes with Britain were really fighting for their rights because they were isolated to Australia, or that's kind of what Britain was doing. Anyway, things start to pivot. Now we start to see the emergence of communism. I try to talk about, my family was really affected by communism. I didn't put that in here, but I do try to argue that it was perhaps overlooked, but I mean, the PAM radio was a month's wage in 1956. It was only about 1958, 1960 when Japan started to produce a lot of radios for more competitively priced. But we were just creating operating loans for farms and crop insurance, the concept of crop insurance. This was all the early 1900s. Crop insurance was 1938. And we had these wars. Now, largely these programs were created as the result of the Dust Bowl, but the wars against communism were largely about different strategies for how you manage farming. And everybody was trying to feed the world. Everybody was worried about the chemical weapons that were just created in World War I. And I can't blame these other nations for saying, hey, maybe we should be careful about how we let these pharmaceuticals for agriculture be utilized, because who knows what else they might be capable of. I mean, they were seeing scary things, okay? And so I've got this very sophisticated argument for why we want to privatize the sales tax system. I mentioned that in my thesis right here. That's right there, $100 billion annually, 17% of the budget. I have listed in here somewhere, 15% of the budget is about $1 trillion. Now that's the consumption system. The sales tax system is worth about that. Now I'm just arguing that since businesses can come together to make a market opportunity for government efficiency, which would be a privatized partnership, the government wants to go this direction where they have these privatized, semi-privatized partnerships where they're working with the private sector in this way, but the government still has the right streamlined position to affect that in different ways. So I talk about a 28th Amendment, and I've got that right about here. I talk about it in my Articles of Incorporation, because I suggest that we have an Articles of Incorporation that's basically the business's Bill of Rights. And then now you've been able to model where Strategic pivot would be its own major market vertical. Education would be its own major market vertical. There would be banking and identity products and accounting. You'd have these different major market verticals, and all of the businesses in each major market vertical know that they are protected in a democratic model. That if you're driving the success of the particular market, it's defined in the addendums of strategic pivot what that looks like, who drives the market capitalization, so that we all agree we know what that is. It's defined. And then changing that becomes like passing a law, only there's a Fortune 500 board. The businesses in the major market vertical are another separation of powers. And then there's the standard United States government model, which with its own separation of powers model. We just need the expertise. We can't have just the regulators trying to drive how products are developed. We need the product strategists to be included there, especially once we get to the realms of really advanced AI driving systems. And this could be really the kind of AI we could have. We need a strategy where it's not just every company saying, hey, trust us. We need a compartmentalized, merged encryption strategy. And again, you've got to have businesses coming together to talk about how we're managing architecture with an overarching strategy and how we connect encryption algorithms in an overall way to build a more advanced encryption strategy overall and enable a cyber force. Now, I can argue for all of these things. I can tell you I've run math on what it would take to I suggest that this Fortune 500 board manages the savings bond system, because the United States government, and I have it in these research documents, but the United States government is only selling, it's less than $1 billion in savings bonds right now. And that number is dropping drastically because, and I mean, there are so many things that I should talk about on this user interface. This is where the learning content would be populated that you would be able to shop around for. There would be color coding for college networks versus, YouTube creators that don't necessarily have huge credentialing behind them. But you could highlight learning networks and extracurricular things. There's different levels of prestige with different color coding you could highlight there. All kinds of things that are possible. And you want to protect it such that the different user interfaces, different social medias have the right to compete on some user interface levels and protect and patent certain things for their approach. But you do need these things to tie together such that you have this free market infrastructure that's really sending out the alerts in the best way. Otherwise, I would have to go and create a new page on every social media and do it a bunch of different ways in order to fairly market myself to different networks. And you want the different networks to be able to have fair access to the opportunity, but be able to market themselves and their offerings for their partnerships based upon their learning content partnerships and their priorities. And then the free market can compete to help us pursue our goals and mobilize our society to have the skills to chase after our goals and succeed. Well, this has been a long presentation. There's a lot to all of this. Yes, there's a user interface strategy that I do believe is worth $100 billion a year. I truly believe that'll stretch to $250 billion, but we've got to launch it with this operational strategy. If the president privatizes the United States government is willing to let us privatize this overall partnership, we're going to have ways where we can drive really interesting programs, because this Fortune 500 board and all of these different big companies will be saying, hey, instead of spending money on lobbying, now we're in a position where we can just create the policy goal that we wanted. And it's just a little bit more complicated because now they can't just necessarily directly dump a bunch of money into exactly what they want, but they can say, hey, you know what, citizens? We care about these things. This will help us achieve net zero, or this will help us lead in AI. And then people chase after those skills, and companies try to recruit people who have those skills, who have these great ideas, because they have this pitch alert system, and we're developing the skills and chasing after our goals and fielding recruiting talent as such a great team. That's government efficiency is all about how many people understand the conversations that are happening and how many people can help you solve the problem. And this is all about a Department of Government efficiency that accomplishes that perfectly with the transparency that we need to make these decisions. It's the exact approach that we need. We need to start looking at infrastructures in this more advanced way and be this stronger team. Now I have a very advanced set of presentations. I will show you this one just briefly because I'm already over my target goal for this presentation. I can give you reasons why this logo has this Damascus steel effect and why that's important for history, why that's going to help us bond with the Middle East. I can tell you this swords to plowshares concept with companies working together. You think about it, either companies fight over medical records and try to control all of it, and then they never actually build it so that it's best for the the doctors and the patients. I mean, because if you can't get the medical records you need to save a life, it doesn't matter whose system is prettiest, because you don't have the data that you need. So the companies building these services should want to build the very best solutions, because they could be focused on AI features that automatically take all of background medical records into context and suggest things, so that that doctor sitting in an office between meetings doesn't have to, can hopefully be more efficient, doesn't have to worry and study as many things, because the AI will help them realize those things and manage more of a workload. I'm confident this can be made almost perfect in the long run. But yes, in the initial phases, you're going to want a way for doctors to be like, well, your system missed this or your system missed this, and we can credit those people, or we can at least, build the best system the fastest. But again, this is going to be true in AI driving systems, because we're going to get to a point where we need telemetry, and there are so many other pieces that we could be including. I mean, there are wedded people. My sister just got married. She married a guy whose family has a company that builds the roads, and you could be talking about how we need barcode-like patterns in the lanes with metal filament. You would have like a plastic sticker, and there would be metal filament in it, and so it would just look like a white or a yellow sticker, but the cars would be able to scan that with a metal detector-like technology and detect that pattern in that plastic sticker. And then you just have to have the snowplows have like a little ridge that goes a 1/4 inch up just over the lanes, and then you'll be able to brush the snow off of the roads for the most part. And even if there's a little bit of snow covering that sticker, your car is going to be able to scan through the snow, scan the metal in the lane sticker, and your snowplows will be built such that they won't scrape that off. And there are ways that you can patch those and all kinds of things, but we need to think about the cost that this is going to change the roads, because I estimate that you can build these stickers for like 50 cents or $1 a foot, probably cheaper than that once you get really good at it. But then it's probably like $10,000 per mile, because you have at least 3 lanes on a small road. It's at least $10,000 more per mile, because you have for sure $3,000 in these stickers per mile to spend. And then you have to buy the equipment. We need a new special, which shouldn't be terribly expensive, but you do have a cost of a new piece of equipment that you have to maintain. And so there will be all of these pieces. Now, this has been a really long presentation. I thank you guys for watching this. If you watch this for the full 20 minutes, this is world changing, though. It truly is. Like, I can come up with a model where we can pay off the national debt. I have to get the sales tax system to a point where a Fortune 500 privatized strategy where the government is working in a more advanced way with the private sector. I'll invest in that, because you're opening up all this access to opportunity for me to follow along with all of this. It's so much more organized. I'll give you guys my tax return every year. I just want to make sure, especially, that I'm going to get, because I'm young enough yet. Once I get over 50, it's not going to make as much sense for me to give you guys my tax returns, because I'm going to want that over 60, once I get to my retirement age, for sure. But you want a model where the next generation will pay for these wars and boost us out of this? I can get people 200% returns. Now, yes, technically this means, according to my plan, we're going to technically pay back $60 trillion over the course of 150 years. But instead of paying it just to a bunch of big banks, we're now distributing this out to the citizens who want to help us pay off our national debt. So the citizens are actually going to make money off of this. And I've now taken our national debt problem and I've turned it in a way to boost everybody's retirement, because we've built a stronger system. And this is the best way to manage savings bonds, because the businesses are and the sales tax system is one of the closest drivers of inflation. So if you do this and you can come up with this model, yes, I've got to get to the point where this overall network 20 years from now is controlling $1.5 trillion in the sales tax system, which, according to the numbers in my research, works out really well, because right now, and this is in the America's Greatest Moment document, right now the sales tax system, where it's accounting for about 17.6%, and that is of about $5 trillion. Now, that comes out to $850 billion to $1 trillion a year. We don't have to, if we just get to the point where we're managing the sales tax system and it just grows as it will for the next 20, 30 years, then we're going to be to a point where we're going to be able to offset the deficit because we will be in this negotiating position where the private sector is helping us to drive more advanced programs and we're a stronger team, and people will, I know they will give you they will invest in the savings bonds more thoroughly. Now there are some other things that we can do with these programs that I have intentions for too. 25 minutes is longer than I wanted. Thank you for listening. I appreciate you, team. Hopefully we talk more soon. I can give this a much more polished. It is a very complex set of things. If you talk to me for an hour with questions after this video, when you get time to watch this whole video, then we'll have a really productive conversation. I'm very confident. And like I said, I mostly just care what this can be for the world. Yes, I would love to come along for the ride, but I'm not going to try to steer this more than the software engineers that have far more skill than me that can actually make this happen. You guys honestly do deserve more equity than me. But I hope that I can earn your respect. So I look forward to talking more and working together in the future. Thank you. Thanks, Nic. Thanks, WebVolta. Appreciate you.